the enduring appeal of classic video games in the modern era. The phenomenon of nostalgia plays a profound role in why millions of gamers worldwide continue to prefer classic video games over modern titles. This isn't simply about remembering old games fondly. It's about how our brains form powerful emotional connections to experiences from our formative years. Neuroscientific research shows that when we revisit games from our childhood or adolescence, our brains activate the same pleasure centers that were stimulated during our initial playthroughs, creating a potent emotional feedback loop. These games become intertwined with our personal histories, reminding us of simpler times when we had fewer responsibilities and could lose ourselves completely in these digital worlds. The distinctive sounds of a Super Nintendo booting up or the specific musical cues from a PlayStation 1 RPG can trigger vivid sense memories that modern games, despite their technical superiority, simply can't replicate because they lack these deep personal associations. One of the most significant differences between classic and modern games lies in their fundamental design philosophies. Older games, constrained by the limited hardware of their time, had to focus intensely on creating compelling gameplay mechanics because they couldn't rely on visual spectacle. Developers working on 8-bit and 16-bit systems became masters of extracting maximum fun from minimal resources, resulting in titles with incredibly tight controls, perfectly balanced difficulty curves, and innovative mechanics that stood the test of time. In contrast, many contemporary AAA games invest disproportionately in graphical fidelity while neglecting core gameplay, leading to visually stunning but ultimately hollow experiences. The industry's current obsession with photorealism often comes at the expense of imaginative art direction and memorable gameplay, a trade-off that leaves many players yearning for the more stylized, gameplay-first approach of classic titles. The video game industry's shift toward aggressive monetization strategies has fundamentally altered the player experience in ways that make many gamers retreat to older titles. Where classic games were complete products sold at a fixed price, today's games are often designed as platforms for continuous monetization through battle passes, loot boxes, and microtransactions. This creates constant psychological pressure on players, with daily login rewards fostering addictive behaviors and limited-time events manufacturing artificial scarcity. Many modern games feel like they're constantly trying to sell you something rather than simply provide enjoyment, creating a fundamentally different relationship between player and game. The purity of older gaming experiences, where your purchase gave you complete access to all content without hidden costs or psychological manipulation, stands in stark contrast to today's monetized ecosystems that often feel more like digital casinos than entertainment products. Classic video games demonstrate a level of design purity that has become increasingly rare in the modern gaming landscape. Without the ability to rely on cinematic cutscenes or voice acting, developers of older games had to communicate their vision through gameplay alone. This limitation bred incredible creativity, resulting in titles that were masterclasses in intuitive design. Think of how Super Mario Bros. Teaches players its rules simply through level design, or how Tetris creates endless engagement from a single simple mechanic. Modern games, by contrast, often suffer from feature creep, stuffing their experiences with unnecessary mechanics and bloated open worlds that dilute their core appeal. The focused, distilled nature of classic game design creates experiences that remain satisfying decades later, while many modern titles feel overwhelming in their attempt to include every possible feature at the expense of cohesive design. While technological advancement has enabled photorealistic graphics, many players find themselves drawn back to the stylized visuals of older games. Pixel art and early 3D graphics possess a distinctive charm that transcends their technical limitations. They represent not what games actually look like, but how we remember them looking in our imaginations. These art styles required developers to be more creative with their visual storytelling, using clever techniques to suggest detail where none technically existed. Moreover, these stylized graphics age far more gracefully than attempts at realism. Compare how a game like Chrono Trigger still looks beautiful today versus early attempts at realistic 3D that now appear dated and awkward. There's also a nostalgic warmth to these visuals that modern hyper-realistic games often lack, creating a more inviting and imaginative play space that encourages players to fill in the gaps with their own creativity. Older video games were famously difficult by today's standards, and this challenge forms a significant part of their enduring appeal. In an era before widespread internet access, games needed to provide extended playtime through genuine difficulty rather than artificial length padding. This resulted in titles that demanded real skill mastery, memorization, quick reflexes, and pattern recognition, creating an immensely satisfying sense of accomplishment when finally conquered. Modern games, designed for broader audiences, often prioritize accessibility over challenge, leading to experiences that feel less rewarding to complete. The recent popularity of Souls-like games demonstrates that many players still crave this type of meaningful difficulty, proving that the market for challenging gameplay never disappeared. It was simply underserved by mainstream developers chasing mass-market appeal. Before the era of online connectivity, multiplayer gaming was an inherently social, in-person experience that created lasting memories. Classic multiplayer titles like GoldenEye 007, Mario Kart 64, and Street Fighter II were designed for shared screen play, fostering real human interaction. The laughter, the trash talk, the spontaneous celebrations and rivalries that formed around a single television screen. This created a fundamentally different social dynamic than today's online multiplayer, where players often remain silent strangers separated by headsets and screens. The physical presence of other players transformed gaming from a solitary activity into a shared social event, creating bonds and memories that online interactions simply can't replicate. For many players, this lost social dimension represents one of the most sorely missed aspects of classic gaming. The physicality of older games created a different relationship between players and their collections. Cartridges and discs were objects to be collected, displayed, and treasured. Their boxes adorned with artwork that fired the imagination, their instruction manuals filled with lore and artwork that extended the game world beyond the screen. There was ceremony to inserting a cartridge or disc, a physical connection to the gaming experience that digital downloads can't replicate. Moreover, physical ownership meant true possession. Your games couldn't be delisted or revoked by digital storefronts. This tangible aspect of gaming created a stronger emotional attachment to game libraries, with each physical copy representing not just software, but a physical artifact of gaming history and personal memories. Classic games enjoy an active afterlife thanks to dedicated communities that keep them relevant through various means. Speedrunning has turned old games into competitive platforms where players discover new challenges decades after release. Modding communities breathe new life into classic titles with updated graphics, new levels, and quality of life improvements. Retro gaming conventions, YouTube channels, and online forums create spaces where appreciation for these games continues to grow rather than fade. This vibrant ecosystem means classic games aren't just remembered. They're actively played, discussed, and celebrated in ways that keep them culturally significant. Modern games rarely receive this level of sustained engagement, often disappearing from public consciousness shortly after their release window closes. The modern gaming landscape presents players with an almost paralyzing abundance of choice and obligation. Between the constant churn of new releases, live service game updates, seasonal content, and sprawling open worlds, many players feel overwhelmed rather than excited by contemporary gaming. Older titles offer refuge from this fatigue. Their finite scope and lack of ongoing content demands create a more manageable, less stressful experience. For time-constrained adults, the ability to pick up a classic game and play without worrying about missing limited-time events or falling behind on battle passes is incredibly appealing. Classic games respect the player's time in ways that modern games, designed to maximize engagement metrics, often fail to do. The audio landscapes of older games hold a special place in gaming history due to the technical constraints that forced composers to maximize melody and memorability. Limited by primitive sound chips, composers like Nobuo Uematsu from Final Fantasy, Koji Kondo from Super Mario Bros., and Yuzo Koshiro from Streets of Rage created remarkably catchy and emotionally evocative music that had to loop endlessly without becoming irritating. These technical limitations bred incredible creativity, resulting in soundtracks that remain iconic decades later. Modern orchestral scores, while technically impressive, often lack the same immediate memorability and hook-driven composition that made classic game music so distinctive and enduring. Many classic games were created by small, passionate teams with significant creative freedom, resulting in titles with distinctive personalities and innovative ideas. Before the era of corporate oversight, focus groups, and risk-averse publishers, game developers could pursue their creative visions with fewer compromises. This led to wonderfully eccentric titles like Earthbound, Psychonauts, and Panzer Dragoon that wore their creators' personalities proudly. Modern AAA development, with its enormous budgets and corporate oversight, tends towards safer, more homogenized experiences designed by committee. The unfiltered creative expression found in many classic games gives them an authenticity and charm that's increasingly rare in today's calculated, market-tested game releases. Classic video games typically had clear endpoints. You defeated the final boss, watched the ending sequence, and the credits rolled. This sense of closure and accomplishment is increasingly rare in modern gaming, where live service titles and endless content updates mean games never truly end. The satisfaction of conquering a challenging classic like Ninja Gaiden or Castlevania provided a definitive sense of mastery that modern games often lack. Even in RPGs with dozens of hours of content, there was always a finality to seeing the end appear on screen, a punctuation mark to the experience that's missing from today's never-ending games-as-a-service titles. Older games were often brutally difficult by design, creating a satisfying curve of mastery that modern games frequently lack. In an era when games needed to justify their price tags with extended playtime, developers created challenges that required genuine skill development to overcome. Beating a game like Ghosts and Goblins or Battletoads represented a real achievement, creating stories that players would share with friends. This difficulty wasn't just about extending playtime, it created a meaningful sense of progression and accomplishment that's often missing from modern games designed to be completed by nearly all players, regardless of skill level. The growing accessibility of classic games through emulation, remasters, and digital re-releases has played a significant role in their continued popularity. Services like Nintendo Switch Online's NES and SNES libraries, Xbox backward compatibility, and platforms like GOG.com have made it easier than ever for both nostalgic players and new audiences to experience gaming's classics. These re-releases often include quality-of-life improvements like save states and graphical filters while preserving the core experience, allowing modern players to appreciate these games without some of the frustrations of original hardware. This accessibility ensures that classic games remain part of the ongoing gaming conversation rather than fading into obscurity. The way players discovered games in the classic era created fundamentally different relationships with titles than today's hype-driven release cycles. Before internet coverage and influencer marketing, players often discovered games through word-of-mouth, magazine previews, or simply browsing rental store shelves. This organic discovery process made each find feel personal and special, rather than the result of a coordinated marketing campaign. There was mystery to these games. You couldn't watch complete playthroughs on YouTube before buying, or read exhaustive wikis explaining every mechanic. This sense of discovery and personal exploration is difficult to replicate in today's information-saturated gaming landscape. The massive popularity of games like Dark Souls, Hollow Knight, and Celeste demonstrates that the core appeal of classic game design never disappeared. It was simply abandoned by much of the mainstream industry. These modern games successfully capture the spirit of classic design principles: meaningful challenge, precise mechanics, and rewarding mastery. Their success proves that there's still a huge audience for games that respect players' intelligence and perseverance, suggesting that the industry's move toward accessibility may have overshot by leaving behind players who crave genuine challenge. In an increasingly chaotic world, many players find comfort in returning to familiar classic games rather than constantly learning new systems and mechanics. Replaying a beloved childhood game is like revisiting a favorite book or movie. There's comfort in the predictability and nostalgia of the experience. After a stressful day, many players prefer the known quantities of classic games to the cognitive load of learning a new triple-A title's complex systems. This comfort factor helps explain why classic games maintain such staying power even as technology advances. Many classic console games inherited design philosophies from arcade cabinets, focusing on short, replayable sessions with high-score chasing. This created incredibly tight, focused experiences where every element served the core gameplay loop. Modern games, especially open-world titles, often lack this disciplined design, stuffing their worlds with repetitive content that dilutes the core experience. The arcade-inspired approach resulted in games that were easy to pick up, but difficult to master. A design ethos that created countless classics and remains influential today, even as the industry has largely moved away from pure arcade-style experiences. YouTube creators and streamers have played a significant role in keeping classic games relevant to new audiences. Channels like The Gaming Historian provide fascinating deep dives into game development stories, while creators like Summoning Salt explore the competitive histories of speedrunning. Even angry video game nerds' comedic retrospectives introduced classic games to generations who never experienced them originally. This content creates new context for appreciating older games, highlighting their design innovations and cultural impact in ways that make them compelling, even to players who didn't grow up with them. Classic games offer clearly defined boundaries that create healthier player relationships than many modern, always-online titles. Without daily login rewards, battle passes, or fear of missing out mechanics, players can engage with classic games at their own pace without psychological manipulation. This creates a more balanced, self-determined approach to gaming that many players find refreshing compared to the constant demands of live service titles. The ability to play a game to completion and then move on, rather than being trapped in an endless engagement loop, represents a fundamentally different, and for many healthier, way to experience interactive entertainment. The technical limitations of older hardware often resulted in amusing glitches and exploits that became part of a game's charm and legacy. From the famous Missing No glitch in Pokémon Red and Blue to the sequence breaks in Super Metroid, these unintended behaviors often added unexpected depth and replay value to classic titles. Modern games, with their constant patches and updates, rarely develop this kind of emergent gameplay or community-discovered secrets. There was a certain magic to discovering these glitches in an era before instant online guides, creating personal stories and shared experiences that bound gaming communities together. In an age where digital storefronts regularly delist games and online services eventually shut down, physical copies of classic games represent a more permanent form of preservation. Your original copy of Chrono Trigger or Sonic the Hedgehog will still work decades later, unaffected by corporate decisions about server maintenance or licensing agreements. This reliability creates a different relationship with classic games. They become artifacts that can't be taken away or altered by outside forces. As modern gaming becomes increasingly dependent on online infrastructure and digital distribution, the self-contained nature of physical classic games becomes ever more appealing. Many classic games represent more than just entertainment. They're important cultural artifacts that shaped the medium's evolution. Playing the original Super Mario Bros., Doom, or Final Fantasy VII today isn't just about fun, it's about understanding gaming history and appreciating how these foundational titles established conventions that still influence game design. These games have become part of our shared cultural heritage, with their innovations and iconic moments referenced throughout popular culture. Their historical significance gives them value beyond mere nostalgia, making them worth revisiting as key milestones in interactive entertainment's development. The enduring popularity of classic video games speaks to fundamental qualities that transcend technological advancement. Their focus on pure gameplay, respect for players' time and intelligence, and authentic creative vision create experiences that modern games often struggle to match. In an industry increasingly dominated by monetization strategies and graphical one-upmanship, classic games offer a refreshing alternative, proof that great game design isn't about technical specifications, but about creating compelling, satisfying experiences that stand the test of time. Whether through nostalgia, superior design principles, or simply as an antidote to modern gaming's excesses, classic games continue to provide value that ensures their place in gaming's present as well as its past. Thanks for watching.